The Vorthak warship Dreadstar hung in the void, like a blade poised to strike, its silver-purple hull drinking in the starlight. Its energy cores pulsed with a harsh violet glow, casting jagged shadows across the command deck. Commander Vorgul stood motionless at the observation blister, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back. His armored carapace, polished to a gunmetal sheen, reflected the cold light of distant stars. They had been watching the humans for cycles now. The Vorthak High Command had deemed them insignificant, another young, reckless species clawing their way up from the dirt. Unpredictable, yet here they were, defying every projection. Vorgul's secondary eyelids flicked sideways as he studied the holographic feed. A human vessel, the UNS Resolute, drifted in high orbit over a contested world. It was blocky, inelegant, compared to the sleek brutality of Vorthak design. But something about it unsettled him. "Gromnak," he rumbled, his voice a deep vibration in the dense atmosphere of the command deck. The scientist scuttled forward, his spined crest twitching with nervous energy. "Commander, explain this." Vorgul gestured to the display. Gromnak's claws danced across the console, pulling up schematics, primitive by our standards. "Their armor is layered, not pure alloy. Their weapons," he hesitated. "They use kinetics, ballistics, crude but effective." Vorgul's mandibles flexed in irritation. "They should not be effective." Gromnak's frill darkened, a sign of unease. "Their ships are slower. Yes, less advanced, but they compensate." The scientist hesitated again. "They fight differently." Vorgul turned fully now, his armored bulk casting a shadow over the smaller Vorthak. "Differently how?" Gromnak tapped the display. The Resolute shifted in the projection, revealing something Vorgul had missed. Its hull was scarred. Not from battle damage, but from deliberate modification. Welded plating, reinforced bulkheads, improvised shielding. "They adapt," Gromnak said quietly. "They take what they have, and they make it more." Vorgul exhaled through his vents, a slow, measured sound. The humans had no right to be this resilient, no right to survive where others had fallen. He zoomed in on the human ship's bridge. Through the reinforced viewport, he could just make out the silhouette of their commander, Colonel Taylor Dixon. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture unyielding even in the face of the unknown. Vorgul's instincts prickled. Predators recognized predators, and the humans, it seemed, had never stopped being one. The Resolute hung in the void, a battered sentinel against the infinite dark. Its hull bore the marks of 100 battles. Some lost, some won, all survived. The humans had no sleek alloys, no shimmering energy shields, just steel, grit, and the stubborn refusal to break. Vorgul watched the feed from the observation deck, his claws flexing against the command console. The human ship was a relic by Vorthak standards, a patchwork of salvaged plating and jury-rigged systems. Yet it moved with purpose, its thrusters burning steady despite the strain. Gromnak's voice cut through the silence. "Their power signatures are erratic, fluctuating." Vorgul didn't respond. He was too busy studying the human commander. Colonel Taylor Dixon stood at the center of her bridge, her posture rigid, her gaze locked on the tactical display. She was smaller than he expected. Most apex species towered over humans. But there was something in the way she held herself. A coiled tension, like a blade waiting to be drawn. Predators recognized predators. There was more. Gromnak adjusted the scanners, peeling back layers of the Resolutes. Crude armor beneath the welds and reinforcements. Something pulsed. Not the clean, controlled hum of Vorthak reactors, but a ragged, uneven rhythm like a heartbeat. "They're running on fumes," Gromnak muttered. Vorgul's crest flared in disbelief. The humans should have been dead in the void. Their power core was damaged, their reserves depleted. By all logic, their ship should have been a drifting tomb. But the Resolute wasn't drifting. It was hunting. A proximity alert blared. One of the Vorthak patrol drones had strayed too close. The humans reacted instantly, their weapons snapped to target, tracking the drone with eerie precision. No hesitation, no wasted movement. Vorgul's instincts screamed. This wasn't just resilience, this was calculation. He zoomed in on the human bridge again. Dixon hadn't flinched at the alert. Her lips moved, issuing orders too quiet for the sensors to catch, and her crew moved like extensions of her will. Gromnak exhaled sharply. They've modified their targeting algorithms. Their systems shouldn't be able to lock on that fast. Vorgul's claws dug into the console. The humans had no right to be this dangerous, but they were, and worse. They knew it. A new alert flashed. The Resolute's engines flared. A sudden burst of acceleration that sent the ship arcing toward the Vorthak fleet's flank. Not retreating, not surrendering. Gromnak's spines bristled. "There, I see it," Vorgul growled. The humans weren't just surviving, they were adapting, and Vorgul had the sinking feeling they were just getting started. The Resolute cut through the void like a blade through flesh, engines burning with a controlled fury that defied Vorthak tactical projections. Vorgul's command deck hummed with tension, the air thick with the acrid scent of ozone and unease. His secondary officers worked in silence, their spines rigid, their claws tapping at consoles with forced precision. Gromnak's voice was a low hiss. Their acceleration curve, it doesn't match any known human drive signature. Vorgul didn't need the scientist to tell him that. The human ship moved with a predatory grace, its trajectory not just evasive but deliberate. It wasn't fleeing, it was positioning. And that was the problem. The Vorthak had waged war across 100 systems, crushed empires that dared challenge their supremacy. They understood war as a science, predictable, methodical, a dance of superior firepower and disciplined formations. But this was something else. The Resolute's weapons fired again, not in desperation, not in blind retaliation, but in sequence. Railgun slugs punched through the shields of a Vorthak frigate, followed milliseconds later by precision plasma bursts that seared into the breaches. The frigate's hull buckled, its silver-purple energy cores flickering before detonating in a silent violet eruption. Vorgul's claws flexed. Humans weren't supposed to fight like this. They were supposed to be reckless, emotional, prone to panic under sustained assault. Yet here they were, dismantling his fleet with the cold efficiency of a surgeon. Gromnak's talons danced over the sensor display, pulling up a tactical overlay. Their fire patterns, they're not random, they're learning. A chill slithered down Vorgul's spine. He had seen this before, not in battle simulations, not in war games, but in the wilds of his homeworld, where the apex predators didn't just hunt, they studied. They tested weaknesses, probed defenses, adapted strategies in real time. And now, staring at the Resolute's relentless advance, he recognized that same instinct in the humans. Dixon's face filled the holoscreen again, her expression unreadable. "Just focus," Gromnak exhaled sharply. "They've recalibrated their point defense systems. Our torpedoes aren't getting through." Vorgul's mandibles tightened. This wasn't just a battle, it was a test. And the humans were passing. A new alert blared. The Resolute had broken formation, not to retreat, but to flank. Its engines flared once more, a controlled burn that sent it arcing behind the wreckage of the fallen frigate, using the debris as cover. Vorgul's instincts screamed. They weren't just adapting. They were hunting. Gromnak's voice was barely audible. "Hi, Commander. Their targeting systems, they've locked on to the Dreadfang." The Dreadfang, his flagship. Vorgul's blood ran cold. The first rule of war was simple: know your enemy. And in this moment, with the Resolute's weapons humming to life, he realized with terrible clarity that the Vorthak had never truly known humanity at all. They had dismissed them as primitive, unpredictable, weak. But weakness did not carve through a superior force with such ruthless precision. Weakness did not smile in the face of annihilation. Dixon's lips moved again. A silent command. And the Resolute fired. The Resolute's railguns discharged in perfect synchronicity, their hypersonic slugs tearing through the void with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Vorgul's tactical display flared crimson as the projectiles struck, not at the Dreadfang's shields, but at the exposed power conduits along its underbelly. A calculated strike, a predator's strike. The Vorthak flagship shuddered, its silver-purple energy cores flickering like dying stars. Alarms shrieked through the command deck, their harsh metallic wails drowning out Gromnock's frantic diagnostics. Direct hit on auxiliary reactors, structural integrity compromised. Vorgul's claws dug into the armrests of his command throne. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Dreadfang was a fortress, a monument to Vorthak supremacy, its armor forged from alloys that had withstood the siege cannons of a dozen conquered species. Yet the humans had found the flaw, the one flaw in its design, and they had exploited it without hesitation. On the view screen, the Resolute banked hard, its thrusters flaring as it evaded retaliatory fire. The human vessel moved with an almost organic fluidity, its maneuvers too sharp, too alive for something of its size. It shouldn't have been possible. Yet there it was. Gromnock's voice was a whisper of disbelief. They're targeting algorithms. They're not just compensating for our movements. They're predicting them. Vorgul's mandibles tightened. Prediction was a luxury of time, of calculation, of certainty. But the humans fought as if they had none of those things, as if they needed none of them. Aboard the Resolute, Colonel Taylor Dixon exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over the tactical console. The Dreadfang's shields were buckling, its once impenetrable aura of invincibility crumbling under the weight of her ship's relentless assault. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt only the cold, gnawing certainty of what came next. The Vorthak were not a species that accepted defeat, and they would not accept it now. "Captain Reynolds," she said, her voice steady. "Status on the Dreadfang's primary weapon?" Reynolds didn't look up from his display. "Still charging. But if their power fluctuations are any indication, they're diverting everything they've got into it." Dixon's jaw clenched. The Vorthak's so-called annihilator cannon was a weapon of last resort, a city killer, a fleet ender. If it fired at this range, even the Resolute's reinforced hull wouldn't survive. But the Dreadfang was wounded, desperate, and desperate enemies made mistakes. "Helm," she ordered. "Bring us in closer." A beat of silence. Then, without hesitation, the Resolute surged forward, not away from the danger, but toward it. Vorgul's tactical display screamed warnings as the human ship closed the distance, its trajectory a straight suicidal line toward the Dreadfang's exposed flank. No species with any sense of self-preservation would charge a wounded predator. Yet the humans did. And in that moment, Vorgul understood. This was not a battle of strength, not of technology, not even of tactics. It was a battle of will, and the humans, it seemed, had none to spare. Gromnock's voice cut through the chaos. "High Commander, the human vessel is transmitting." Vorgul's spine stiffened. A surrender? A plea? The signal crackled across the comms. Not words. Not even a voice, just a sound, a deep, resonant pulse, repeating in steady, rhythmic intervals. Gromnock's eyes widened. "It's a beacon." Vorgul's blood turned to ice. Because he recognized that pattern, every Vorthak warrior did. It was the signal of the doomed, the call of the dead, and the humans were broadcasting it directly at them. On the Resolute's bridge, Reynolds finally looked up, his gaze locking with Dixon's. "They'll think it's a distress call," he said quietly. Dixon's lips curled into something too sharp to be a smile. "Let them." The Vorthak would assume the humans were signaling for help. They would assume the Resolute was crippled. They would assume victory, and in that assumption, they would make their final mistake, because humanity had long ago learned a truth the Vorthak had yet to grasp. The deadliest hunters never roared. They whispered, and then they struck. The Vorthak warship Eternal Claw hung in the void like a blade poised to strike, its silver-purple hull shimmering with the cold, predatory grace of its kind. The humans had gone silent. No transmissions, no erratic maneuvers, just that haunting, rhythmic pulse, a distress beacon, a call for mercy. Vorgul's mandibles twitched in amusement. The Vorthak had seen this before. Lesser species, broken and bleeding, sending out their final cries into the dark. They always thought mercy existed in the galaxy. They were always wrong. Gromnock's claws tapped against the console, his bioluminescent veins flickering uneasily. "The signal is unusually strong," he murmured, almost as if they want us to hear it. Vorgul dismissed the observation with a flick of his wrist. Desperation amplifies foolishness. They are wounded. They are ours. On the view screen, the human vessel, Resolute, drifted like a corpse, its once imposing silhouette now a shadow of itself. Scorch marks marred its flanks, and its engines flickered weakly, like a dying heartbeat. Vorgul turned to his weapons officer. "Prepare boarding parties. I want their command core seized before their reactors fail." The officer hesitated. "High Commander, their structural scans still show. Irrelevant." Vorgul's voice was a blade of finality. "They are beaten, and we will take what remains." Aboard the Resolute, Colonel Taylor Dixon stood motionless in the dim red glow of the bridge, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest of her chair. The Vorthak were coming. She could feel it in the silence, in the way the ship hummed beneath her boots, not with fear, but with coiled anticipation. Reynolds exhaled slowly beside her, his grip tightening around the grip of his sidearm. "They're taking the bait." Dixon didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Vorthak thought they were predators closing in on wounded prey. They didn't realize the Resolute wasn't a corpse, it was a trap, and humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of the ambush. The first Vorthak boarding pod slammed into the Resolute's hull like silver, purple meteors, their armored claws latching onto the ship's exterior with mechanical precision. Inside, warriors clad in reinforced combat plating readied their weapons, their violet optics scanning for resistance. There was none. The corridors were dark. Gromnock's unease deepened as he stepped onto the human vessel, his claws clicking against the metal deck. The air smelled wrong, not of panic, not of blood, but of something colder. Calculated, his instincts screamed at him to retreat, but Vorgul's command was absolute. The warriors advanced, their footfalls echoing through the empty halls. A whisper of movement, a flicker in the shadows. Gromnock's breath caught as his optics adjusted. The walls were lined with cloth, tattered, scorched, but unmistakable. Human war banners, draped like funeral shrouds across the bulkheads, and beneath them, etched into the metal in jagged, deliberate strokes, a single phrase in the human script: "We loam to the killing floor." Gromnock's blood turned to ice, because suddenly he understood. This wasn't a ship, it was a grave, and the humans had dug it for them. On the bridge of the Eternal Claw, Vorgul watched the feed from his boarding teams with growing irritation. "Report," he snarled. Static hissed in response, raw primal, the transmission dissolved into chaos, the sound of gunfire, of metal rending, of something laughing in the dark. Vorgul's claws dug into the armrests of his throne. Impossible. Humans didn't laugh in battle. They feared. They broke. The view screen flickered, and then, for the first time, Vorgul saw them. Figures clad in blackened armor, their visors glowing like embers in the dark. They moved like ghosts, their weapons humming with a lethality that made even Vorthak warriors falter, and their eyes burned, not with fear, not with desperation, but with something far worse. Recognition, because every apex predator in the galaxy knew that look. It was the gaze of something that had stared into the abyss and found it lacking. Vorgul's mandibles twitched. For the first time in his life, the High Commander of the Vorthak Armada felt something alien crawl down his spine. The humans hadn't been signaling for help. They'd been counting down. The clock had struck 0. The Vorthak command deck shuddered as the first boarding pod struck, not with the clumsy impact of a desperate assault, but with the surgical precision of a predator's fangs. The hull groaned, the sound reverberating through the silver-purple corridors like a death knell. Vorgul's claws flexed against the armrests of his throne. His neural interface flickered with damage reports, each one colder than the last. Hull integrity compromised, Deck 7 breached, security systems offline. The humans weren't just boarding, they were hunting. On the lower decks, Gromnock's frill flared as the emergency lumens bathed the corridors in a sickly violet pulse. His talons danced across a data slate, pulling up schematics of the human boarding pods. The readings made his secondary heart stutter. The pods weren't standard assault craft. They were coffins, sealed, single-use capsules, designed to punch through armor and disgorge their occupants into the heart of enemy ships. No life support, no retrieval protocols, just a one-way trip into hell, and the humans had launched dozens. Gromnock's mandibles clicked in disbelief. No species in the galaxy would willingly subject themselves to such a death sentence. Not even the Vorthak, who prided themselves on their warriors' resolve. Yet here they were, the humans. Colonel Taylor Dixon's boots hit the deck with a metallic thud, her armor's dampeners absorbing the impact. Around her, the rest of her squad fanned out, their visors casting eerie red halos in the smoke-choked corridor. The Vorthak ship was a maze of brutalist architecture, sharp angles, exposed conduits, and walls lined with the same gunmetal alloy as their weapons. It stank of ozone and something coppery, like old blood baked into the metal. Taylor's HUD painted the enemy in cold, tactical outlines. Vorthak warriors, their carapace armor glinting under the emergency lights, were already moving to intercept. Let them come. She adjusted her grip on the plasma rifle, the weapon humming softly in her hands. The Vorthak thought they understood war. They thought they had mastered fear. But they had never fought something that enjoyed it. Captain Marcus Reynolds moved like a shadow, his armor stealth systems bending the light around him. The Vorthak sentries never saw him. Not until his monomolecular blade parted their throats in a single silent stroke. He didn't pause. Didn't hesitate. The mission was simple. Reach the reactor. Trigger the overload. A suicide run by any measure. Marcus grinned behind his helmet. Funny how humans kept redefining suicide into victory. Vorgul watched the carnage unfold on the command deck's holodisplay. The humans weren't just fighting, they were dancing. Every movement was calculated, every shot deliberate. They fought like a single organism. A pack of wolves tearing through his warriors with terrifying efficiency. And their eyes. Those damned eyes, even through the grainy feed, he could see it. The fire, the hunger. His neural interface pinged again. Reactor access breached. Vorgul's spines flattened against his skull. They weren't here to take the ship. They were here to burn it. Somewhere in the dark, a human soldier laughed. The Vorthak had never heard such a sound in battle before. They would never forget it. The reactor chamber pulsed with a sickly silver-purple glow, its energy cores thrumming like the heartbeat of some great wounded beast. The air smelled of ozone and scorched metal, the scent of war clinging to every surface. Captain Marcus Reynolds moved through the carnage like a ghost, his boots silent against the deck. Behind him, the bodies of Vorthak warriors lay in twisted heaps, their armor rent by precise gunfire, their spines still twitching in death. The humans had carved a path through them with brutal efficiency, not out of cruelty but necessity. Marcus didn't look back. Ahead, the reactor's containment field shimmered, a lattice of violet energy holding back the raw power within. One wrong move, and the entire chamber would detonate like a dying star. He exhaled. This was the moment. On the command deck, Vorgul watched the feed with mounting horror. The human wasn't hesitating. He wasn't supposed to do that. Every species in the galaxy had a self-preservation instinct. Even the most battle-hardened warriors flinched at the brink of annihilation. But this human, this monster, walked toward the reactor with the calm of a man stepping into his own home. Gromnak, the scientist, hissed beside him, his neural tendrils flickering with distress. "They don't fear death," he whispered. Vorgul's spines tightened. No, it was worse than that. The human welcomed it. Marcus reached the console. His fingers danced across the alien interface, bypassing security protocols with terrifying ease. The Vorthak had built their systems to be impenetrable. To them. Humans, though, humans cheated. The reactor's hum deepened, the containment field flickering as the overload sequence initiated. Alarms blared, their shrieks echoing through the ship like the wails of the damned. Marcus didn't flinch. He turned his head, just slightly, and met the lens of the nearest surveillance drone. Then he smiled. Vorgul's blood ran cold. That smile, it wasn't defiance, it wasn't madness, it was recognition. The human knew he was being watched, knew his death would be witnessed. And in that moment, Vorgul understood something fundamental, something that shattered every assumption his species had ever held about war. Humans didn't fight for survival, they fought for meaning, and there was no meaning greater than this. Standing at the edge of oblivion, grinning into the dark, the reactor's core flared, its silver-purple light swallowing the chamber whole. The feed cut to static, a voice crackling over the comms. "Colonel Dixon to all units. Mission accomplished. Fall back." Vorgul's claws dug into the command console. They had lost. Not just the ship, not just the battle, but the very idea of what war was supposed to be. Because the humans had rewritten it, and they had done so laughing. The silence in the Vorthak command nexus was absolute. Vorgul's claws remained embedded in the console, the metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary heart pulsed erratically, a biological alarm that had no answer for what he had just witnessed. The static on the display was a void, a nothingness that somehow carried more weight than the destruction of an entire warship. Gromnak stood frozen beside him, his cranial ridges twitching in involuntary distress. The scientist had spent cycles studying human warfare, their tactics, their weapons, their predictable desperation. But this was something else. The human had smiled, not in defiance, not in madness, in recognition, as if he had known with absolute certainty that his death would be more than an ending. It would be a statement. And the worst part, it had worked. Vorgul's mandibles flexed, a reflexive threat display with no target. The humans had not just defeated them, they had redefined the terms of engagement. The Vorthak Dominion had waged war for millennia under one unshakable principle. Survival was the only victory. Every battle was a calculation of cost versus gain, every sacrifice measured against strategic necessity. But the human Reynolds, the records identified him, had not fought for survival. He had fought for something worse, something unquantifiable. Gromnak's voice was a rasp, barely audible. "They do not fear oblivion." Vorgul did not respond. He didn't need to. The truth was there, in the last flickering image before the feed dissolved into static. The human's grin, the reactor's core flaring behind him, the way he had stood as if he were not a soldier, but an architect, a destroyer of paradigms. The comms crackled again, this time with a transmission from the surviving human forces. Colonel Dixon's voice was calm, almost detached. Fall back, not a retreat, a withdrawal, because the mission was already over. Vorgul's neural interface flickered as the tactical display updated, the remaining human vessels disengaging with eerie precision. They had what they came for, not territory, not resources, proof that the Vorthak could be broken, not by superior firepower, not by overwhelming force, but by something far more dangerous. Conviction. Gromnak's talons tapped against the console, pulling up the last biometric readings from the human soldier. Elevated adrenaline, elevated cortisol, elevated dopamine. The human had been happy, not in the way of a warrior embracing glory, not in the way of a fanatic welcoming martyrdom, happy like a scientist observing an experiment succeed, happy like a predator watching its prey realize it was already dead. Vorgul exhaled, the sound a low, metallic hiss. The Vorthak Dominion had faced empires before. They had shattered civilizations that dared oppose them, reduced worlds to cinders for defiance. But this was not defiance. This was revelation. And as the last human ships vanished into the void, their engines flaring like dying stars, Vorgul understood one terrible truth. The galaxy had just learned what it meant to fear the dark. And the humans, they had brought it. The void between stars was never truly silent. Vorgul knew this. Every Vorthak commander did. The hum of the Dreadfang's engines, the whisper of its silver-purple energy cores, cycling, the distant pulse of dying stars. These were the sounds of the universe breathing. But now, standing on the command deck, the silence was absolute. His secondary heart thrummed against his ribs, a slow, heavy rhythm. The tactical display before him was a graveyard of data, scattered wreckage, fading energy signatures, the last echoes of a battle that should have been a slaughter. Their slaughter, Gromnock's claws scraped against the console as he pulled up the final scans. The human ships had left no debris, no bodies, no traces of their dead, just the lingering heat of their engines, already cooling in the vacuum. Analysis? Vorgul's voice was a blade dragged across stone. Gromnock's crest flattened, a subconscious reaction to danger. They didn't retreat. The words hung between them, heavy as a neutron star. The humans hadn't fled. They hadn't broken. They had chosen to leave, and that was worse. Vorgul's gaze flicked to the last recorded transmission from the human flagship, Colonel Taylor Dixon's voice, calm as deep water. "You wanted a war. You just didn't realize it was already ours." A shiver ran through the command deck. Recognition. The Vorthak Dominion had spent centuries perfecting war. Their ships were brutal, efficient things, gunmetal hulls lined with violet plasma lances, their designs honed for maximum devastation. They had crushed species that dared resist, burned worlds that refused to kneel. But the humans, they hadn't just fought back. They had smiled. Gromnock's talons tapped a staccato rhythm against the console, pulling up the biometrics again. The human soldier, Captain Marcus Reynolds, had been laughing as he fired the last shot. Not the manic glee of a berserker, not the hollow defiance of a doomed warrior, the quiet, satisfied joy of a predator who had already won. Vorgul's mandibles tightened. He had seen that look before. Not in warriors, not in soldiers, in hunters. The kind that stalked the dark between stars, the kind that waited until their prey knew it was dead before they struck. The kind the Vorthak had once been. A chime echoed through the deck, a priority alert from deep-range sensors. Gromnock's claws froze mid-motion as the data streamed in. Human ships, dozens of them. No, hundreds, not fleeing, converging. Vorgul's secondary heart kicked into a faster rhythm. The humans hadn't been defeated. They had been testing. And now, as their fleet emerged from the void, silent, relentless, their hulls scarred but unbroken, Vorgul understood the terrible truth. The galaxy had always feared the dark, but the humans, they had come from it, and they were bringing it with them. The void between stars had never felt so heavy. Vorgul's command deck was silent, the usual hum of Vorthak battle, chance replaced by the quiet, rhythmic pulse of deep-range sensors. The holographic display painted the approaching human fleet in cold silver light. A swarm of vessels, their silhouettes jagged and asymmetrical, their hulls pocked with the scars of 100 battles they should not have survived. And yet, here they were, not broken, not fleeing. Gromnock's claws twitched over the sensor console, his neural tendrils flickering with agitated violet light. The data was undeniable. The humans had not been routed. They had not been cornered. They had lured the Vorthak into a trap, drawing them deeper into contested space while their reinforcements slipped unseen through the dark. Vorgul's mandibles flexed. The humans had no right to be this coordinated, no right to be this patient. Their species was supposed to be impulsive, reckless, driven by emotion rather than strategy. And yet, the fleet now closing around them moved with the precision of a predator tightening its jaws. A flicker of movement on the display caught his eye. One ship, larger than the others. Its hull was a patchwork of welded armor and scavenged plating. Its prow marked by a single tattered banner, a flag, its colors faded but still visible. Blue, Colonel Taylor Dixon's voice crackled over the calm and deliberate. "You thought we were running." Vorgul's secondary heart stuttered. "We were regrouping." The human fleet ignited their drives, not the blinding flares of Vorthak thrusters, but the deep smoldering burn of old fission cores and jury-rigged warp coils. They moved like shadows, given form. Their approach silent, relentless. Gromnak hissed, his neural tendrils flaring in alarm. Their weapons, they're not even military grade. Half of those ships are retrofitted freighters. Vorgul's claws dug into the command console. That was the true horror. The humans hadn't come with their best. They hadn't needed to. They had come with enough, and they had brought their dead with them. The flagship's comms flickered again, not a transmission, but an open channel. A voice, rough and unsteady, recited something in a language the Vorthak translators struggled to parse. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air. A shiver ran through the deck. The humans were singing, not a war chant, not a battle cry. Gromnak's claws trembled. They're not just fighting, they're remembering. Vorgul finished, his voice hollow. The Vorthak had once been hunters. They had known the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of cornered prey. But somewhere along the way, they had forgotten the most important rule of the hunt. Never corner something that has nothing left to lose. The human fleet opened fire, not with the clean, precise energy lances of the Vorthak, not with the disciplined salvos of a trained armada. With everything, railgun slugs ripped through the void at a fraction of light speed. Missiles, some military grade, others clearly scavenged from decommissioned platforms, streaked toward their targets in erratic, unpredictable patterns. Pulse cannons, jury-rigged and overheating, spat bursts of raw plasma in wild arcs. It was chaos, it was beautiful, and it was working. Vorthak shields flared under the onslaught, their energy matrices overloading as they struggled to compensate for the sheer variety of the assault. A freighter, its hull half, rusted, its engines belching smoke, rammed a cruiser at full burn, its crew bellowing something about taking you with us, before the explosion tore through both ships. Vorgul watched, his blood running cold. This wasn't war. This was vengeance. And the humans had been practicing for a long, long time. The flag on the lead ship snapped taut in the cosmic wind, its colors defiant against the dark. The Vorthak had come to break humanity. Instead, they had reminded them what they were. The void was silent again. Debris drifted in lazy, molten arcs, twisted metal, shattered hull plating, the scorched remnants of ships that would never fly again. The battle had ended hours ago, but the echoes of it lingered in the way the surviving Vorthak vessels hung back, their silver-purple energy signatures flickering with something that might have been hesitation or fear. Commander Vorgul stood on the observation deck of his flagship, his talons flexing against the cold metal railing. His crest, usually rigid with authority, lay flattened against his skull. The humans had not just fought, they had unmade his expectations. His tactical display still flickered with the aftermath, the way their ramshackle fleet had moved, not as a coordinated force, but as a swarm. Every ship, every weapon, every desperate act of defiance had been unpredictable, and it had worked. Behind him, Gromnak's voice was a low, uneasy rasp. Their vessels were barely spaceworthy. Their weapons were outdated. Their tactics were effective. Vorgul finished. The scientist fell silent. Ahead, the human fleet had regrouped. Their ships were battered, some barely holding together. But they had not retreated. They had not surrendered. And at their center, the lead vessel still flew its tattered flag. Vorgul exhaled, his breath fogging the reinforced glass. He had studied humans before this campaign. He had seen their wars, their divisions, their petty conflicts. He had assumed they would fracture under pressure. He had been wrong because when the Vorthak had come to break them, the humans had done something incomprehensible. They had united, not under a government, not under a single leader, but under something deeper, something older, something written in the way their ships had surged forward without hesitation, in the way their voices had crackled over open comms, screaming defiance in a dozen languages. We are still here. And now, as the last echoes of battle faded, Vorgul understood something else. This was not the end. It was the beginning. Colonel Taylor Dixon stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her hands clasped behind her back. The ship groaned around her, its system strained to the limit, but it held. Just like its crew, on the view screen, the Vorthak fleet lingered at the edge of the system, their formations tight, their weapons still primed. But they did not advance. "They're waiting," Captain Reynolds muttered beside her. She nodded. "For orders, for reinforcements, for us to make a mistake." Or maybe, she thought, they were waiting for something else. For the humans to prove this victory wasn't a fluke. For them to show what came next. Taylor's lips curled into a slow, tired smile. Let them wait. In the years to come, the galaxy would remember this battle. The Vorthak would call it the reckoning. The humans would call it the stand. But in the quiet aftermath, as the debris cooled and the stars burned indifferent overhead, there was only one truth that mattered. The humans had not been broken, they had been awakened. And now, as the first of their new warships took shape in the orbital yards, gleaming, terrible, built not just for survival but for war, the galaxy held its breath. Because the humans had been underestimated once. They would not be again, and somewhere, in the dark between the stars, the flag still flew. The silence before the storm, the wreckage of the Vorthak fleet, still drifted in the void, a graveyard of shattered warships and cooling plasma. Scavenger drones flitted between the husks, harvesting what they could. Salvage, data cores, the occasional frozen corpse. The battle was over. But the echoes of it lingered in every sensor feed, every intercepted transmission, every hushed report filtering through the galactic networks. Taylor stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, her reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass. Behind her, the ship hummed with repairs, the crew moving with the quiet efficiency of those who had survived the impossible. The Vorthak had come expecting prey. They had found predators instead. She exhaled, watching her breath fog the glass. The Vorthak were not the only ones watching. The galactic powers had observed the battle in silence. The Kyrix matriarchy, with their cold calculus, would be reassessing their projections. The Wyshtar collective, with their endless debates, would be arguing whether to intervene. The lesser species, those who had bowed to the Vorthak's might, would be whispering in the dark, wondering if the balance of power had truly shifted. And then there were the humans, not just the soldiers, the engineers, the strategists, the civilians, the ones who had watched from colony worlds and orbital stations, who had braced for annihilation and instead witnessed defiance. They had seen what their species could do when pushed to the brink. And now, they would ask, what next? Taylor's fingers brushed the glass. The first of the new ships was already taking shape in the shipyards, its skeleton visible through the construction scaffolds. It was sleeker than the Indomitable, its design refined by battle data, its weapons sharper. More were coming. Dozens, hundreds. The galaxy would call it an arms race. The humans would call it insurance. A chime sounded behind her. She turned as Commander Nold stepped onto the deck, his uniform still streaked with soot from the fires that barely contained. He didn't speak at first, just came to stand beside her, staring out at the wreckage. "They'll be back," he said finally. Taylor nodded. "I know, and next time, they won't underestimate us." She smiled, slow and fierce. Good, because the humans had learned something too. They had learned they could win, and that, more than any weapon, was what would change everything. Outside, the stars burned on, indifferent, but the silence wouldn't last.